Okay, so it's time for part 3 of our Faith, Hope, Love Quiltalong. This is actually block 2, and I have gone ahead and laid out the O and the P. Hopefully you can see them there on the screen. They're kind of, they're white, so they're blended in with my white board here. So it's kind of a false P right now. So what we're going to do is grab a color. For the moment, I'm just going to kind of toss it in here with a pin. So when we go to sew this one, what I'm going to do is actually just sew this block on. So in fact, you know what, let me go ahead and kind of show you. Well, never mind, I'm just going to pin it there for now. We'll just sew the white onto this side, the white onto this side, and then we'll trim it down to what these two should equal, which should be, what is it, 2.5, 2.5, 5, so 4.5 inches. So we'll just sew those three, like I said, white to the colored, white to the colored, and then we'll trim it down to 4.5 inches so it equals the same size as these two right here, and these two. Alright, so now I'm just going to go ahead and stop the camera for a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and fill in with 2 rows of color along here, and 1 row of colors here, and then fill in the little gaps. Okay, so what you want is 6 rows across and 7 rows down. And at this stage, I will go ahead and show you the layout here for the O and P block. Let's see, hopefully you can see it. Let me get a little closer and hopefully it'll not be blurry. Alright, so I'll leave that up there for a second. Oh, maybe I should have left this on the table because I'm probably not able to hold it steady enough anyhow. But you can hit pause here and then you can get a better look at it. It's really fairly simple. Like I said, it's 6 rows across, 7 rows down. Lay out the O and the P first and then put your colors around. And then we'll come back and we'll come back here when I get my colors around and take a look at that, and then we'll sew it together. So I've gone ahead and laid out my OP block here on my table. Sometimes I use my fleece board over there to hang the bigger blocks on, but when I'm dealing with little small scraps like this, I actually like to lay them out on the table because they tend to fall off the wall a little bit. So as you can kind of see, I'll pan over here, we have our Faith block done, and I actually have it pinned on there too. It holds pretty well, but like the bigger the block, the more likely it is to fall down. And so when I started laying out my O and P, I did kind of start to put them there to match the colors of the bottom row, or to not match them, let's put it that way, scrappy. So I wanted them to not look the same, but a lot of times for me, I don't know, I just work a little bit better when I lay it out on the table and can see it this way. So I did make sure that this top row here blends well with the bottom row of the Faith block. So what I have here is 6 rows across, 7 rows down. What we're actually going to do is separate these into 2 blocks, because the first thing that I'm going to do is take care of this center of the P right here. We're going to take this 2.5 inch block and sew the white a 1/4 inch seam right there, and then we'll sew this white one onto this part of the colored block right here, and then it'll create what will it create? 6 3/4 inch block, but we're going to cut it down to 4.5 because that'll be the size of what these 2 blocks is sewn together, and these 2, etc. So basically, I'm going to start with sewing that. Then I am going to take these and sew this column to this column, So I realized in the last video that I was talking all about rows, and kind of probably that's not really correct. So like you have a column and then you have rows going this way. So I'm going to take the second column and sew it to the first column. And then I'm going to take the fourth column and sew it to the third column. So I'm going to sew these in sets of 2 is a more basic way of putting it. And once I have that done, then I will sew the sets of 2. You know, this will be my first column because they'll be sewn together. It'll be my first column, this will be my second column, and then this will be my third. And so I'll sew column 2 to column 1, iron that, come back, sew column 3 to column 2, and then we'll have our strips, and then we'll sew our strips together into a block. And then we'll concentrate on this one. But for right now, I'm going to start with this and cutting it down to 4.5 inch. And I will sew that, and then I will sew these all together. Finish putting these together here. And then, you know, sew these all together, sew these all together, sew these all together. Then come back and iron them. And then sew this one to this one, come back and iron it. Sew this one to this one, come back and iron it. And then we'll have our strips. We'll sew our strips together, create our block for our O, and then we'll come back and create our block for our P. Alright, so I'm going to let you go here. I'm going to just kind of set you up so that you can maybe see some of my sewing a little bit, and I might come back with a little bit more description while I'm doing that, but I think it pretty well explains it, right? I mean, alright, hopefully we'll see. So you can see that my white block is just a little bit bigger than my colored blocks. We talked about that a little bit in the first part. So on this one in particular, when I sew these 2 together, I'm going to go ahead and, since I have to cut it down to 4.5 inches in length anyway, I'm going to go ahead and cut that off so that it's going to be just the right size. And then I'll try to watch out for my O and P blocks as well, and make sure that they get trimmed. Hopefully, if you've picked 2.5 inch squares produced by the same company, you won't have this problem and you won't have to figure it out. Alright, so we're just going to sew this one to this one. And as you can see, there's just a little bit on this side too that's overlapping. So I will actually probably make this match up here on this side, and then sew my 1/4 inch seam according to the fringy bits on the colored part here. So this is my first time doing any kind of tutorial like this, so I am very trying to figure out what I'm doing and what I'm needing to tell you all. So a lot of you are probably experienced quilters, and you can actually probably tell me all the things that I'm doing wrong. But I wanted to kind of try to hopefully do this little tutorial on this particular pattern in such a way that, you know, if you were new to quilting, you would kind of get what I'm doing here. So hopefully, you know, if you're an experienced quilter and you're bored, please just fast forward. And if you're an experienced quilter and you see something that I'm doing wrong, that maybe I could try it this way instead, and that's going to work out better for me, please let me know. I am absolutely fine with, oh, see, right there, started to kind of bunch up. Fine with critiques and suggestions, and don't necessarily love, I mean, nobody loves criticism, like you're just, oh, you're awful, da 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 da, and how did you ever learn to do that way? That's totally wrong. That kind of criticism. But like a critique of, hey, why don't you try this? That sort of thing. I think I'm one of those people that would be good at, you know, I would tolerate that well. I would say, oh yeah, that's a cool idea. One of the things I just realized is I forgot to use a leader I've been trying to get into the habit of starting my machine with a little scrap piece so that I don't run into a situation, especially like with a half square triangle, you always run into a situation, or I should say you don't always, because I usually don't, and that's why I never did leaders before. But you often, or sometimes, run into a situation with a point where, in fact, I can kind of tell with this one, I probably did and just didn't notice it. Run into a situation where it starts to feed down into your, like your feed dogs start pulling it down into the machine. And so it's good to start with a leader, because then when you actually go to sew your real block, it pulls it along easier. Plus, it's kind of nice because I'm gonna literally, as long as these are not bad, I'm gonna literally like snip off the corner here, and I have a little square now. And so then I'm gonna just work on sewing those together, and maybe we'll create something with our leaders and enders. All right, I don't really use enders though. I'm probably not ever gonna get into that habit. I should, but I probably won't, so there you go. All right, so we've got our center section of our P. Now we're gonna cut it down to 4.5 inches and stick it into the P block, and we'll do that as soon as I get done with the O. So I'm going to press the center for my P block. Okay, first thing I need to figure out is what direction are my seams going for my bottom row, because when I press this first block for the top row of the O block, I need to know which way my seams are going on the faith block. So I will figure that out and I'll bring you right back. Okay, so the bottom of my faith block, the last row in my faith block, is pressed to the right. So this seam for this top row right here needs to be pressed to the left. So that's fairly easy. You literally just put this down and press it to the left. All right, so then my second row for that particular block for this 2 columns, second row for these 2 columns, needs to be to the right. So for me, because I really like to use my right hand, I am actually going to flip this upside down and do the same motion, but it's going to make the seam go to the left, because I'm going to turn it right back up, and to the right. I'm getting you all confused. So my first row, my bottom row of the faith block was to the right. My first row on the O block needs to be to the left. So that's just easy. You just lay it down, press it that direction. The second row needs to be to the right. So I turn it upside down, push it this way, and then turn it right back up. And now my seams should be able to nest. So when I go to sew it, I should be able to put that seam to that seam and nest them in there together. And then hopefully you can see that. Let me get a little closer. So top row goes to the left, second row goes to the right. And when I go to sew these together, I'm going to nest these 2 seams and I'm going to pin it right there. Well, actually I'm going to do it the opposite direction. I'm going to have, this is my top row of the O, this is my second row of the O. I'm going to nest these 2 seams and then sew this together, and I have my top 2 rows of the block. So the row in the faith is to the right, top row of the O is to the left, second row of the O is to the right, third row of the O is going to go to the left. All right, so press that down. I do tend to kind of iron more than I press, but anyhow, so we've got left, right, left. And now we're going to go to the right on this one. But again, what's easiest for me, which may not be easiest for you, well, first of all, it's not really easy to get it open, is it? Jeepers. Come on, there we go. So the other thing that you can do, some people, like I can do this. I can actually just put it halfway and press it like that, and then go like this. And so I've got left, right, left, right. So I've got my first column set up here. So now I'm actually going to press my second column. So the top needs to go to the left. So I will go ahead and press this like this to the left. Second row needs to go to the right. So I don't necessarily have to turn it all the way upside down. I can just turn it like this and then kind of press it down like that. Honestly, with 2.5-inch squares, sometimes I might even just use my little roller here. Just kind of go like that. Give it a little quick press down. And then, all right, so you can actually probably see when I say about nesting seams a little bit better here. So I've got left and I've got right. And then when I flip this over and sew this together, I'm going to literally nest those seams like that. So one's going one direction, one's going the other direction. The other thing you can do is press open. I don't do that very often unless it's a really small block that is going to have a lot of bulk to it. So, all right, and then this one's going to go to the left. I think I have a little strand of pink thread in there, so get that out of the way. Oh, red thread actually. That'll show through on your quilt. Yep. All right, so that way, and then the bottom one goes to the right. All right, so I will just finish the third column, and then I'm going to start sewing them back together, or sewing them together. Okay, so now I've sewn column 1 to column 2, and I just need to press the seams in the direction of the other seams in that particular strip. So, press this one this way, which is actually to the left. So when you pop it upright, it's to the left, because our bottom row is to the right. And then we'll press this one, second row to, it seemed like it's to the left, because of how I'm going right now as it's upside down, but it's actually to the right. I know that confuses a lot of people, but anyhow. So, and then this one will be going like this. So basically I'm just following the directions of what I've already done. And then, so we've got to the left, or sorry, to the right. Now to the left. I know, I'm confusing everybody. I'm trying to not be confusing, but anyhow. So that one's going to the left. This one's going to the right. This one's going to the left. This one's going to be going to the right. So, press that down. Double check myself on my seams. One direction, one direction, one direction, one direction. Now I'm going to sew the third column on. So just set those on there, and I will match them up a little bit better as I sew them. And then I'll come back and I will well, actually, I'm going to go ahead and sew them. I'm going to press them, and then I'll come back when I get ready to sew the strips. So this will all be one row, etc. You can call it row or you can call it strip. But yeah, I'm going to sew these down, press them, and then come back and I will nest the strips together and sew the strips. And once we have the strips sewed, we'll have our O portion of the OP block done, and we'll come back and finish the P. So I thought I'd bring you back and show you something that I might one day turn into a project. So when I talk about leaders and I'm kind of sewing these little half square triangles together, this is actually something that all of these in here are sewn together already. When I go to make a half square triangle of a certain size and the other side is just supposed to be cut off and thrown away, sometimes you end up, like if you just sew down that, you'll end up with a square like so, and it's, you know, kind of tiny, but it's probably 1 3/4 inches. So you could really do something scrappy with a lot of these in here. So I've just kind of always, you know, sewed down the diagonal for the half square triangle that I need for the project, and then I turn around and I will sew down the excess so that I just cut off a half square triangle already. And I've just kind of stuffed them in these jars here, and literally everything in these jars has created a square, except for like the white on the bottom of this one. Those are just individual little half square triangles that when I started this, I just kind of threw the individual pieces in there, and I thought, why am I leaving them separate? Just, you know, sew it together while you're already sewing the other part that you need for your project. And so then I've already got all of these sewn into little squares, and I can just take them and someday make a project out of them, you know, turn them into pinwheels or something like that. So anyhow, one of these days that might be a project that I do. And I'm going to probably take the leaders that I have, like I literally have already sewn this little stack right here of leaders from what we've already started on this Faith, Hope, Love project. So I will probably take these and one day iron them and cut them into the correct size square. You know, trim them down so that you take off the ears at the end, trim them down, and sew them all together into a pinwheel or something like that. So I've got my O strips all pressed down, and now I'm just gonna literally take my second row and pin to my first row, take my fourth row and pin to my third row. So I'm gonna nest these seams, pin them together, sew down this one, sew down this one, then I'll press those, and I will do the same thing with the two different columns that I'm making. I'll just pin them together and finish sewing my O block. And then we'll come back and work on the P block. Okay, so I finished sewing my O block together. For this block, I've actually pressed all the seams for the rows downward. It does not matter at this point which direction you press those seams. I think I just said I sewed them downwards. I pressed them downwards. At this point, it doesn't matter. When we get to doing our pumpkin block over here, it will matter that I will actually need to press those seams upward so that we can nest them with this block here. But for the most part, most of the time, I like to press my row seams downward. Other people may have different opinions. It really, honestly, to me, it doesn't matter. It's just a matter of habit that I just press them going downwards, and then I can kind of iron it. I don't want to iron it at this point because I'm gonna, you know, stretch it too much, etc. But so right now I should just be pressing. But I am one of those people that does kind of tend to go back and forth, etc. If you do a little bit of that, it's probably not a big deal, but too much of it will stretch things out. As you can see, I am not a perfectionist, because if I were, and you might not be able to see it on there, maybe you can, I don't know. If I were a perfectionist, I would be ripping out this seam right here and getting these 2 points to match up better. As you can see, maybe, let's see if I can bring it in a little bit closer, then maybe you can see it. See how much of a non-perfectionist I am. That seam right there should match up with this seam here, and it's probably what, a 1/16 of an inch off. Actually, that's a little bit more than this one here. So these two seams are not necessarily matching, but honestly, in the grand scheme of the quilt, if I were entering this in a show or something like that, they would see it, but I'm just putting it up for a wall hanging, or a table runner or something, and nobody's really gonna focus on that. Nobody that I'm gonna give it to anyhow is gonna focus on, oh my gosh, I wish she would have fixed that. Plus, you know, I probably quilt it out, honestly. I'm not sure exactly what quilting I'm going to do, but I might do something like along my other quilt. I just did a decorative stitch down each column. And so if I do that, honestly, you won't even see it. Okay, so our O block is done. Now for our P block. So, as I said, we sewed these 2 white squares to the center of the P here, and then this strip needs to equal 4.5 inches. I'll set you back here just a little bit so you can see. So we're going to cut this down to 4.5 inches. So let me find my ruler first of all. I actually have a 4.5 inch ruler here, so we're literally going to find our 2 inches. Well, let me see here. What am I at? Here we go. And we need 1.5. Let me see, 1.5. That equals just 1, so we need 1 3/4 on each side. Let me get to the right marks here. So 1 3/4 of white on each side of the color. About 1 1.25, not 1 3/4, 1 1/4, 1 1/4, and then half, 1/4. All right, we're just going to cut it down just like this. I'm a little bit nervous that I might be cutting it too much, and I'm about to do a bad thing. Don't do this. I don't have a rotating mat, so I don't like to have to move. So I try to just cut under there. You don't ever want to cut it towards yourself. You don't ever want to cut into your hand, that sort of thing, because you will cut yourself eventually. But anyhow, so 4.5, and you can kind of freak out here now thinking, oh my gosh, it's too short, it's too short. It's not. You're going to have a seam here, you're going to have a seam here. These are going to match up. So at this point, what I'm going to go ahead and do is sew this column to this column, sew this column to this column, and then I'm going to actually sew these 2 pieces together. So I'm probably going to do this first. I'm going to sew these 2 pieces together, and then I'm going to sew it to this. I'm going to sew these 2 pieces together, and then I'm going to sew this one to this block. So we'll sew these 2 together right here along this strip. In fact, because of my white, you don't have to do this, but because of my white being a little bit longer, I'm going to make a little bit longer than a 1/4 inch seam on this particular one. Actually, maybe I won't. I'll probably cut it down to what this size is after I sew it at a 1/4 inch seam. So I will sew this, sew these two together, we'll sew this, and then also this one to this. Alright, so let me bring you back as soon as I've sewn this and this together, and then I'll show you, actually I'll sew this one, I'll sew this two together, I'll sew this one, and then I'll come back and bring you back for sewing this strip to this, and then we'll do these, because we'll have this one already as a block, we'll have this one as a block, and we'll have this one as a block. Why don't I do that? We'll sew this as a block, 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 and then we'll bring the three together. For the P block, I'm going to confuse you again here. So, I got my O block done. My seams nest to my bottom seam, I should say, my bottom seam, they all go to the right. So my top row needs to go to the left. So what I have done here is I actually already had the P portion, this P portion right here, sewn together. So I took these two blocks, I sewed them together, and then I sewed those two down this seam right here to make this little square right here, this little portion. And I took these two blocks, I sewed them together, and then I sewed them onto, so like the bottom half of the P onto the top half of the P. I actually pressed this down so that this seam is going to the left, which will match up with the one that's going to the right here. So left, right. So that's going to match up just right with that. So we actually have formed a block here already for our P. So then what I've done is I sewed these two columns, you know, these two to each other, these two to each other, these two to each other. Same with this out here, these two, and these two. So now what I'm going to do is actually flip these over, sew down this seam, press this open, or press it so that the seam goes actually upwards, because this one's downwards. So I will sew these together, press this seam up so that it can nest with this seam. Once I have that sewn together, I'll come back and I'll sew this on. So I'll have this, let me get these back right. So I'll have these two sewn together, and then I will actually sew these two on, and I will actually press this one up. So this seam right here is going to press up because this one's pressed down. This one's going to press up because this one's pressed down. So I said we didn't really need to worry about how the rows get pressed until we get to the pumpkin block, but I forgot. We're actually going to need to worry about it right here. So we'll sew these two together, press the seam up, then sew these two together, press the seam up. That will form this block, and then in here we'll do basically the same thing. Sew these two together. I'm going to go ahead and press up, even though it really doesn't matter right here. It's not gonna, I could do it downwards, actually it'll be fine. But then this bottom one needs to be pressed up because this seam right here is pressed down. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do my pressing correctly on these blocks, and then I will actually, honestly, you get it, I'm going to go ahead and just form the rest of the block here. And then all I need to do, once I form this block, is sew it to this block and press the seam down. I think I can press the seam, yeah, I can press the seam down. It'll be a little bit bulky right in here, but actually, honestly, no more than any of the others. So I was thinking there was more seam here than what. So now we have our faith hop portion of the quilt. Faith and hop. And next we will have part 4, which is our love block. And then we'll work on our pumpkin. And like I said, if you don't want to do a pumpkin, maybe you want this to be a year-round quilt, maybe you want to put in like a carpenter star or something like that. Maybe I'll come back at the end of this series and have some options drawn up or something like that. Maybe you could put like 2 blocks in where the pumpkin would go, that sort of thing. Let's see, I believe it'll be, yeah, 12 2.5-inch pieces by 7, 12 by 7. So, you know, maybe it's, I mean, that's not really going to be, so it'd be, if you did 2 blocks, it would be 6 wide, 7 down. You could always do like, just do another strip of color and then make 2 6 square blocks. That would be kind of neat. I might have to think of something.